Well, this week the Matildas are back in action with a three-game window in the United States for the SheBelieves Cup, where they'll face AFC rivals Japan, the USA, and Colombia. As the young Matildas get set for their own three-game series against Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, and Thailand's under-20s side, taking place in Canberra. So plenty of international Australian action everywhere you want to look. In the spirit of unity, none of the sides in the hunt for the final top six spots decided they wanted to win their games in round 16 of the A-League Women, regardless of what a broadcast may or may not have told you, whilst other teams can be quite proud of their performances. On this episode of the Dubcast, part of the Round Ball Australia podcast network, my name is Poletti and Burke. It's just the two of us this week until we have our special guest a little bit later on.
Yeah, happy to be here once again talking all things dub. And it was a pretty interesting week this week.
It was indeed. Joining us a little bit later in the show is Alex Bishop. He's a freelance writer in Japan who does a bit of work for Japan Times, The Guardian, and a bunch of other places. I spoke with him earlier this week to look at Japan, who not only have a new coach. What is it with all these federations who can actually hire coaches, Burke? I don't get it. Is that a thing
I'm so
people can do?
jealous. I'm so jealous. I wish that was us.
So do I. But yes, no, so I spoke with Alex and we'll play that for you a little bit later. But as always, we start with our big storyline. So, Burke, what was your big storyline of the week?
My big storyline was the absolute shambles that was the broadcasting for the Brisbane Western United game, because that was just ridiculous business. Don't know how they managed to do that because even like as well as the commentating, getting it incorrect, which is, fair enough because that's not live on site, that's from a studio. But for them to flick the scoreboard over to show that it had gone up to 1-0 was very interesting of them. Don't know if that means that there's no one actually from the APL on the ground at every game, but it certainly looks that way.
Yeah, this was. So I was actually at Perry Park for this game, so I knew what the
Why
correct
didn't
score
you?
was
Well, why didn't you tell us? Hmm?
because I didn't know what was going on, okay? All I saw was.
Unbelievable, Poletti. You let us all on the internet suffer whilst you had the answers. What kind of a journalist are you?
Wow. Wow. Starting with the attacks early, I see. No, look, so all I saw was I saw Danielle Tan had the goal in, and then I immediately looked around, saw the offside flag, had a chuckle to myself as everyone was celebrating. Saw Western United try to get the quick restart going on, pulled back by the referee, which probably didn't help the situation either because with that quick restart getting pulled back, that allowed more time for the replays and the celebrations to go through, which meant the ball was well up the other end of the pitch by the time the broadcast cut back to live pictures. It's not the first time this has happened, but it certainly hasn't been in this sort of situation. I can distinctly recall one game. I want to say it was last season from the number 2 sports ground where the team had scored a goal, flag was up for offside, commentator is sort of like talking through, the goal, the celebration, everything like that. And in the meantime, the balls entered the other end of the pitch because, the flag was up for offside. The commentator wasn't aware the play had restarted. And I understand why, the commentary is being done remotely more and more. And we all know there's no money in this league, right? It is a cost-saving measure, and we understand that. But when you've got 4 camera operators on the ground, maybe 5 at best, all of whom are having a director in their ear telling them where to go, what shot to get, do this, do that. They're not necessarily looking for an offside flag, particularly given that the official is on the broadcast side of the ground. And in the meantime, all the cameras are pointed at the celebrations going the other end. So they're not looking out of the corner of their eye. They're focusing on making sure they get what the director's telling them to get. Um, I just if you it's if you are going to persist with having remote commentary for whatever reason, then surely this has to be the wake up call for the APL or production company or whoever it is that's in charge of putting all this together, to have at least one person on the ground whose job it is to pay attention to this sort of stuff, because you need someone who can immediately, whether they're talking into a two-way, whether they're talking, straight onto a phone call going, no, offside, this goal's been ruled out, because this can't be allowed to happen. This is it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. I think that's the only word to use here. It's amateur hour.
It's it's just so unprofessional.
Yeah, I I honestly, like, I couldn't believe it when I saw it. And then I saw other people talking about it on social media. But yeah, it's just it all sort of reeked of it's unprofessionalism. It's amateur hour, and it took away from what were two incredible goalkeeping performances from Chloe Lincoln and Olivia Sakani. Um, Fun fact, there were 10 goals scored in the two games between Brisbane Roar and Western United this year, and all 10 of them occurred in the first game because this one ended 0-0. It was, as I said, two very strong goalkeeping performances. Burke, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts on this one, because I certainly don't.
No, just that it was crazy that this was the game Brisbane decided was going to be their first draw in like over a year. Wild stuff. Don't know why they decided that, but
Yeah, it was interesting. I did speak to both of the Smiths post game, Alex and Kat, who both identified that there's sort of like some key personnel changes between the two games as to why they looked vastly different. Obviously the Friars are out for the Raw, and Western United made a few changes as well. So it was sort of like just that really explained a lot. But yeah, I just to go from 10 goals to 0 goals is certainly, I think, one of the more shocking things of the weekend. For me, it's Melbourne City 2, Sydney FC 1. Hawkesby scores again as a striker, playing out of position. I made my thoughts on that clear. I'm not going to repeat them. Go back and listen to the last 2 weeks. Um, and then Melbourne City completed yet another comeback. Mariana Speckmeyer scoring just after half time, and Briley Henry just before stoppage time to put the icing on the cake. They're still 7 points clear at the top of the table. Are Melbourne City. I know we sort of touched on this last week. Like, I have not seen a second of this game. The reason I was in Queensland was because I was at AEW Grand Slam on Saturday night, and I sort of opened up my phone between matches at halftime and sort of saw, oh, Melbourne City really 45 minutes away from making us all have to eat crow basically here on the Dubcast. And then I checked the phone at full time, and it's like, nope, City came through. Um, I just, Burke, I know you've seen most of this game. What happened here? Because, what happened?
this was a prime example of when playing out from the back goes wrong. That's how Sydney scored their goal. Mieres sold poor Laura Hughes down the river over the waterfall and like into the next like large body of water. Um, by playing it to her at the top of the box, and then Sydney just descended upon her, and there were simply too many of them. And Hawkesby came out with the ball, and from that far away from goal, you're not gonna miss if you're Mackenzie Hawkesby, and she didn't. And I have seen most of this game now, but I wasn't watching it at the time. I remember checking my phone and seeing Sydney had gone up 1-0 and just thinking, oh my God. I didn't think they were going to lose. I thought, oh, it was that meme where it's like, oh, here we go again. It's the guy walking down like the alleyway from like GTA or something. It was like they're not losing this game. They will draw or they will win. And Yeah, speaking of like taking a long time for things, Briley Henry scoring a goal for the first time in like a million years. And what a time to do it. So they don't have another draw because I think the other two meetings they've had have been draws as well, which has been ridiculous because Sydney are not good. Sorry, I'm not. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I I don't think anything can really stop City. They've shown they can win games outright, like and go straight from 0 to 100. They've shown that they can, dig their own grave and then bury themselves in it and then claw their way back out. And they've shown that they can do it in a tight contest. I don't know, it'd have to take something really special from another team, as well as I think a combination of Melbourne City having the worst day on earth, which I think is what happened in the championship game last season. So that game against City versus Sydney for the championship. Like Sydney had a really good day and City just had a really bad one. I think that's what would have to happen at least for someone to actually uh take some take 3 points away from Melbourne City.
I know we touched on this a bit last week when we ran through sort of the remaining schedule for Melbourne City, but surely they can't keep conceding early and winning, right? Like the wheels have to fall off at some point if they keep floating with danger like this, right?
You say that, but here we are again, where they've gone down early and they've still come back. Like, I, they, they're just gonna do it, I'm afraid. Just, I, yeah, they're just gonna keep going, I guess.
They're just gonna keep
The
doing
will,
it till they don't.
yeah, and I don't think you can really pick when that is, unless you go back and watch the last episode where we did pick where that may be.
I think we picked it around the international break. It was either against the Jets or Wellington, whichever one they
I
faced
think we said
first.
it was Wellington because they have to go to Poletti Park, which is not an
Yes,
easy place to play at.
yes. Keep the
So
ball on the ground at
Wellington,
Pororoa Park.
yeah, yeah, and away
Uh,
from Annalie Longo.
yes, yes, and possibly Annalie Longo's dog. I haven't seen the dog in quite a while, but you
Who
never know
knows?
when it's going to make an
Little
appearance.
Tiger could make another showing. I wouldn't hate it. I would actually find that very fun.
I think most of us would indeed. We'll get into the rest of the weekend's action now. The Western Sydney Wanderers for the Newcastle Jets won. Tash Pryor opened the scoring before the Wanderers dominated the rest of the game. Bronte True, Ina Harada, Amy Harrison from the spot, and Holly Caspers, who has now scored in back-to-back weeks in the 88th minute. She just loves scoring in the 88th minute. It's weird, but no, that's now back-to-back weeks where she's done so. And that win gets the Wanderers off the bottom of the table and puts Sydney FC firmly at the bottom, which I'm sure you're finding quite some delight in, Burke. Um, uh, I just, I don't know, because the Tash Pryor opened the scoring, but then it was all one-way traffic, and it didn't look close. I will fully admit I had this game on in the background in my hotel room because I decided both because the TV in my room didn't have Paramount Plus installed, but it did have YouTube installed, and I decided I wanted to watch NPL New South Wales instead. So
Fair.
this game was on in the background, and every time I'd look over, I'm just like, oh, the Jets are in danger. Oh, the Jets are in danger. Oh dear. Oh no, there's another one. There's another one. Um,
Yeah.
what happened here?
That Tash Price scored that goal, and then everyone said, "Okay, that's enough football for today." I think they must have come to that consensus altogether. Um, because yeah, that was not great from the Jets. Um, yeah, I don't know what to say about that. They looked very unlike themselves in that they let themselves get kind of trampled. Because whilst they don't They haven't won a lot of games this season. They've never really felt like they were that far out of the contest. I mean, they kept Melbourne City quiet for a whole half when they probably should have actually gone into that half leading, into the second half leading 1-0. But yeah, this was very out of character for them. I know if you looked at the table and hadn't been watching the league, you would see this result and been like, oh yeah, it's two kind of crap teams going at each other, and this is the result of that. But it's not really. Um, yeah, they did not look good. Western Sydney Wanderers, however, they looked good.
They did look good indeed. And so the Wanderers put themselves into a very precarious situation. So a couple of weeks ago, they were up against the brink of mathematical elimination, and we talked about that in detail. There's now 7 games to play. They've won their last 2 against a Brisbane Raw side who are sort of in free fall down the table. They've just absolutely dominated the Newcastle Jets. 7 games to play. They're 12 points back of the top 6. They couldn't, could they?
Well, I mean, I think maybe everyone's been banking on the wrong Sydney team to make a late charge for finals. Because everyone's been saying like, oh yeah, Sydney FC they'll still sneak in. Maybe it's not them. Maybe it's the West. I mean, who have they got left to play is the real question. It's not really about the points, it's about who they have to face, kind of thing, at least in my head.
That is
Let's
a
see.
very good question.
Let's have a
Something
look.
I should
Western
have
Sydney.
looked up. So they have an away trip to Gosford after
Ooh.
the international break. They then have an away trip to
Hmm.
Wellington, home against the Victory, away to Perth Glory, a home derby against Western Sydney, which against Sydney FC, which will take place at Marconi Stadium. Then they travel away to the Brisbane Roar before hosting Canberra on the final day of the season. And one fixture immediately stands out there for me, and that is the away
Is it the
trip to
Derby?
Perth Glory.
Oh.
No, it's the away trip to Perth Glory because, and we'll touch on the other side from the West in a minute. Um, is if both of those sides can find their form and keep on winning, that could decide, like that could end someone's season. That game right there, depending on how things go. Look, I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're just so far back. Like I've been writing most of these teams off all season anyway, so I don't know. It's just, I mean, they pick up 2 very unlikely results. They get a third, they get a fourth. The momentum starts to roll, which leads us into our first listener question for this week from Tommy on Blue Sky. Should the Wanderers be relegated for finally deciding to start winning games a week after they can no longer qualify for finals? They're taking the mick, right? It's not on. Well, they can still technically qualify for finals. They haven't quite been mathematically eliminated yet, but yes, they should be relegated. I think.
I think most Sydney teams should be relegated, but that's a different thing.
Very good question, Tommy. Absolutely love it. We will go out to the other side from the West now. Perth Glory 2, the Wellington Phoenix 1. Izzy Dalton opened the scoring in the 31st minute. Olivia Ferguson levelled it just before half time for a Tiana Jaber own goal, sealed it in the 71st minute. Burke, I mean, Perth Glory looked good in this game. This is sort
They
of
did.
this is what we had been sort of, I guess, hoping for kind of all
Hmm.
season from the Glory. A couple of players started to come back. It's just, it looks like it's all clicking, but much like the Wanderers, probably too little too late.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say, but I thought I'd let you finish your sentence. Um, it was unfortunate for Wellington because they also had been quite good in the game. Yeah, it was just a shame that they collected the own goal. It always feels worse when it's an own goal as opposed to like someone having actually scored the goal. because it's like, yeah, I shouldn't be scoring for the opposition, but here we are. Um, but yeah, Perth looked really strong across like every line. There was no point where I thought that they were not going to get a result, whether that be the draw or the win. But I think they were kind of overdue something positive. And the Samker, what do they call it? The Samker Football Center, Football Stadium,
Yes.
whatever it is. It looks really nice. Always looks really nice. But that might also be because of the times that they have to play there, the time zones. But it looks really good. Yeah.
Yes, no, as someone who has commentated quite often at Valentine Sports Park, I can completely understand why the Sam Kerr Football Centre looks like that at the times they play, and that is a reference you will understand if you watch, instead if you listen to the Beyond 90 podcast this week. Um, I know we've just kind of talked about the Wanderers in the same vein as well. Perth Glory, 9 points back of the top six. They're in ninth, 7 games to play. I mean, I know one result doesn't make a season; it's just their fourth win. They couldn't do it either, could they? Could they? Okay, I'll ask that question a different way. Could they at least make the final 3 rounds of the season?
I don't think so. There's something about Perth that makes me a little bit more convinced that they're done. Maybe I just think Western Sydney Wanderers are more insane than Perth are. Like, I think Western Sydney might just be crazy enough to do it. I don't think Perth is. Does that make sense? I'm assigning vibes to each team's finals um, chances. Yeah. Western Sydney are
It
crazy
makes
enough to do it. Perth are not.
yes, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. That Western Sydney would be crazy enough to do it. You know why? Because they live in Western Sydney. Um, one of the said we'll move along. Melbourne victory to Central Coast Mariners nil. Great opener from M Gilnick here. I believe she might have been offside, but would have been played onside by the Mariners defender getting a touch on it. Regardless, it was converted. Um, I, I'm going to mix up the order of what the rundown I've got here. For the second goal, was it Emily Gilnick or Alex Shidiak that scored the goal? Because I can see the argument for both being able to claim it.
It it looked like it looked like well, Chidiac definitely hit the ball, but because of the camera angles and the way the players were positioned, I couldn't see if Gilnick got the final touch or not. I don't have they attributed it to Gilnick? I think most people have, but I don't know. I can't say. I fear only the ball knows, and she's not giving up her secrets anytime soon. Um, yeah, but I can also see the argument for it either way. Yeah, the only people that'd be able to say for sure would be the ones on the pitch. So,
Yeah, I mean the goal has still been marked down at as an Alex Chidiac goal.
huh.
Regardless, Melbourne victory 2, Central Coast Mariners nil. Um, but the one thing that we do have to talk about from this game is the penalty, Burke. It was a very clear as day penalty, but Emily Gilnick, I was honestly waiting for the assistant refs behind the goal to just sort of raise, sort of like they do in NRL, raise the flags to indicate that it's a successful conversion attempt. Because what on earth was that from Emily Gilnick? I don't get it.
Legend says that that ball has just entered orbit. It's just about to start circulating amongst all the what are they? The Tesla Starlink things, those satellites. Yeah, that's where that ball is. Just just hit that one completely wrong, I guess, or I guess lifted too much. Um, yeah, because that was out of there. This is why some places have signs that say "park at your own risk," because the ball isn't always going to stay in the vicinity of where it's meant to. Sometimes it will come into the car park or outer space, or
Yeah,
just not where
yeah,
it should be.
Yeah, it was not great. So, for those who haven't seen it, Emily Gilnick steps up, take the penalty after Rachel Lowe was fouled by Jessica Seaman, and just rockets it over the crossbar at such a ferocious pace. Um, I have a theory here, Burke. I think if you have ever played for the Matildas at any point, either current or past, you should not be allowed to take penalties because no one seems to be able to take penalties outside of a shootout.
I disagree. Steph Catley is right there. Argue with the wall. You saw her. She took that penalty against Ireland, and she had the entire country on her back at that point. She had to do that, and she did. She's the only player I would confidently trust at any given point to take a penalty. Maybe Van Egmond, but she hasn't really been on pen duties in like a long time. Um, yeah, so unless you are Steph Catley, get away, get the hell away from the penalty spot. No Matildas near that spot ever. You have no need to be there. Okay? I don't care if the entire team asks you to take the penalty. You say no. You say no when you
Give,
turn your back.
give it to Steph. Steph knows all. What else do we still need to talk about? We have one game left. Adelaide United 1, Canberra United 1. Darcy Malone headed goal for Canberra, failed clearance after a failed clearance by Claudia Jenkins, which was then cancelled out by Chelsea Dorber strike over Sally James after Fiona Wirtz assisted on that goal. And I did talk about this in the intro a little bit, but does any side want to solidify their spot in the top six? So Wellington lost as the table decides it wants to disappear. Wellington lost, Canberra drew, Mariners lost, Brisbane drew, Western United drew. That's 4 through 8. Like, does any side just be like, yep, no, let's have me in the top six?
Only Melbourne City. Melbourne City, the only team that's certain of what they're doing here. Everyone else is just having fun. Yeah, I think the draw was a fair outcome. I did feel bad for Claudia Jenkins though, because she has been excellent all season. Of course, it's the one mistake that she makes that actually results in a goal for the opposition. Um, but yeah, it was a good goal from Darcy Malone as well. Was it her first in the A-Leagues as well? I feel like it might have been.
That is a
Um,
very good question. I should know the answer to that one. As I do some more frantic Googling. Great podcast listening, this is. So while we're looking this up, where am I actually? No, I have it here. Yes, that is her first recorded goal in the A Leagues.
I love knowing things. I've absorbed all of this information
Oh
about
no,
Darcy
no,
Malone
sorry.
via
I was looking
osmosis.
at the.
Oh,
Sorry, I was looking at the wrong section. Um, no,
boo.
that is still her first recorded goal at
Oh,
A League. Was I start
yay!
looking at the right section?
Excellent. I love it. I've absorbed all of this information about Darcy Malone via osmosis from Eric. Just being on the Beyond 90 pod, it's come through the computer screen to me. But it was a good goal, is really what I was trying to say there. Yeah.
Um, Claudia Jenkins, keeper of the season, right? I don't think it's close at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. I think, yeah, every other goalkeeper you can pick a definite howler moment that immediately strikes them from the list of a potential candidate. So yeah, I think it's quite clearly Jenkins.
Yep. As I said, both sides had chances to win this game. Burke said it was a fair result. I think it was a fair result as well. Which leaves us with Canberra United just 1 point outside of the top six on 23 points, and Central Coast Mariners in the top six on 24 points as we head into the international break. Uh, as I said to start the show, I interviewed Alex Bishop earlier this week to talk about the Japanese women's national team, the arrival of Nils Nilsson and Leah Blaney into the coaching staff, as well as a range of other issues in Japan, and we'll play that interview for you now. And joining us now on the Dubcast is Alex Bishop. Alex is based in Japan, does some freelance work for The Guardian and other places just with women's football in Japan in general. And here to help us preview the SheBelieves Cup. Alex, welcome.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me on.
So, I guess one of the reasons I wanted to get you on is because obviously Japan, another team in the AFC, and they're quite often seen as the benchmark in the region. And they had a very good 2023 Women's World Cup campaign. They've been a thorn in Australia's side quite often in the past. And so I guess, this new era, new coach, new arrival, I thought this was a perfect opportunity to sort of see where everything is at. And I think that's where we'll start. So Nils Nielsen was announced as the new coach late last year. What was the reaction to his arrival in Japan?
Well, I think overall it was quite a welcome, fresh new direction that it seems that the JFA are trying to take the Nadeshiko in with the appointment of Nielsen. We wouldn't really say it was a surprise because the talk of appointing an all-time first foreigner, giving them the top job, that's kind of been going on. The discussion's been going on in the background for quite a while now. With it being Nils Nielsen, that was kept under wraps for quite some time. When the announcement was made, I think people were intrigue is the word that I'd use to describe it, and it really does seem like we're going into a new exciting time for the women's national team in Japan. Yeah, so hopefully prosperous times ahead, and then we can go a little bit better than that finish at the quarterfinal finish in 2023. And
one of the key things here is that he's still going to be based in Europe. He's not moving to Japan, and we've been through that recently here in Australia with Tony Gustafsson, who famously didn't move to Australia and coached for the most part. Like, he'd come to Australia, training camps, media commitments, stuff like that, but for the most part he was based in Europe. And one of the things that he did was he'd rely a lot on his assistants and scouts to have a look at the local competition here, the A-League Women, or he'd watch it from TV rather than view it quite often with his own eyes. And that felt like it was just, he was very disconnected at times from the local scene. He'd be focusing quite regularly on the European cohort of Matildas players, which, they make up the majority of the squad, and that's understandable. But you also need to constantly be thinking about the next generation, and quite often he would tout, this concept of, well, I've debuted at the most Matildas of almost any coach, throughout his tenure, but it never felt like he knew how to use them at their best. It was sort of like bring them in for the sake of bringing them in, or things like that. So has there been any sort of indication as to how that's going to work with Nielsen also being based out of Europe?
Yeah, well, I think the main difference with the situation now with Nielsen, and we've seen this quite a few times, right? Over on the men's side, we had a very kind of ugly end to Jurgen Klinsmann's tenure with South Korea. The difference now, I think, is that the expectations of how it's going to work with Nils Nielsen, that's been made very clear from the start. I think at the very first release, when they announced his appointment, it was made very clear he's going to be based in Europe. Of course, he's going to be coming over to Japan to view some games. Specifically, he was here in January for the series of youth tournaments we have at the beginning of the year. He was watching all of that, so he understands the talent pipeline quite well. But a lot of it makes a lot of sense to me, at least on paper. Because one thing, we might get into the squad makeup in a little bit, but for the SheBelieves Cup, we have the highest amount of non-Japan based players included in the squad. There's 19. Most of them, the large majority of them, are going to be based in Europe, and that's where Nielsen's going to be. He's going to be over there. He's going to be working and kind of visiting these games and turning up at training sessions, working closely with the players. So in that sense, it makes a lot of kind of logical sense that he is going to be in Europe and close to the majority of the Nadeshiko squad, right? And I imagine what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of campaigns, a lot of friendly matches and exhibition tournaments like the SheBelieves that might happen in Europe, keeping everything quite close because they are the opponents who Japan often lose to in major tournaments, right? So it makes a lot of sense to kind of keep the squad or the bulk of the squad close to that, in that environment, learning about the game over there, the culture of the game, the technical aspects, all that good stuff, with Nielsen very close to all that going on. And then, of course, there's always going to be a few players based here in Japan and new young players up and coming. I said before that he was already in Japan in January. He's going to have to keep that up, that's for sure. He's going to have to keep these visits coming. He's going to have to get his face out there, meet the Japanese public, get to the games and stuff like that, really see these players, these young players, have words with them. And maybe similar to the situation with Gustafsson, he's going to have a couple of assistants over here in Japan as well who are going to be helping with that. So like I say, on paper it makes a lot of sense. The only fear that I have with that is, will this mean that we're going to have a complete or an almost complete removal of the national team from Japan, with almost everything based overseas, right? In Japan, more so than many other nations, it's very important that the national team is, very accessible to the local population. Sadly, the local league, the Wii League, it doesn't have that much interest right now, at least. It is the national team, which is what is kind of the pinnacle, the main part of women's football here in Japan. And that really has to be kind of kept close to the people, both with the matches and then, of course, the work that they do at the community level, all this kind of outreach stuff, right? And with the social good that all does. That's really going to have to continue. So, and to be fair to them, they do have a friendly set up in April against Colombia that'll be in Osaka. That's going to be a very good game. So that is one example of that. As long as these kind of things continue and they keep showing a lot of face and a lot of commitment to the game at the local level in Japan, I can see that it'll work out quite well. Because like I say, it's not as if he's being pressured and, you have to move here. It's been made very clear that, look, Nielsen's going to be over in Europe, working with the players, most of which are based and doing really well in Europe there. And of course, there are Japanese coaches and also the head of women's football for the JFA, Norio Sasaki. He's the manager that won the World Cup with Japan in 2011. He's very kind of vocal, always at the press conference, always kind of showing a lot of face. So he's going to be very much involved as well. So I hope that it's going to be a much smoother arrangement than what we might have seen in the past, but only time will tell with that.
I found it quite interesting when you just mentioned, that the Wii League isn't quite necessarily clicked with the public. And I understand it's 3 years old, so it hasn't quite had the lengthy history yet. But like the A-League women, we're in season 18 here. That competition set up post 2007 World Cup. And it's very similar where women's football, it's in the eyes of the general public, it's the Matildas and that's it. Like attendances are low, A-League women games, the broadcast quality isn't always the best. We had an incident on the weekend with the commentator calling remotely, who wasn't aware that the potential game-winning goal had been flagged for offside, with like 3 minutes to go. So, these sorts of things. And so I think that's quite interesting, the similarities, because in Australia, and this was something that Leah Blaney was quite vocal on, Japan is the benchmark. We need to be more like Japan. How do we beat Japan? Whereas other people are always like, well, how do we beat these European nations? How do we beat the Americans? And when that's happened, it hasn't always led to success, particularly at the Asian Cup, which is sort of like, I guess, the big crowning jewel that Australia really needs to get a hold of, because, bounced out of the last tournament to South Korea in the quarterfinals. But I think it's just fascinating to me how similarly, the philosophies and the interests are.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think. It just kind of speaks to the tide of the game, I suppose. All the big leagues and all the interest is over in Europe, right? And if we're talking about women's football, then the NWSL in the States. That's where. If you're looking at teams like Chelsea, Barcelona, these are massive, massive football institutions. They have the resources, they have the sports science, all that kind of stuff. They have the fan base, the big games, the ability to kind of get in these big stadiums and have these massive, massive events that they can really showcase to all around the world, basically. And here, at least at the the domestic league level over here in the AFC region, it's kind of difficult. It's not quite there yet. I do think that both of Australia and Japan are very capable, proven themselves capable of developing players and all that kind of stuff, and getting players right up to the top of the game globally. But in terms of the local leagues, it is quite tough. I assume it's similar in Australia, like in Japan. It does compete with a lot of other sports, not just the men's football as well, but in Japan there's baseball, basketball's getting popular. There's all kinds of things as well. So, I mean, how much time do people actually have to get involved in this kind of stuff, right? So, yeah, and unlike one big thing I should mention about what we have, like football in Japan in general, if we look at the J League, the men's game, it's not like it is in Europe where the men's game of the Premier League, it's very expensive to get the tickets. Sometimes, you can get games that are a little bit, I don't want to say unsafe, but, you do have problems with crowd and all that kind of stuff. You wouldn't really want to take family, that kind of thing. The men's J League, definitely you can, it's very cheap to get tickets. It's a very safe environment. It's a very enjoyable thing to go and watch. And then you have like a Wii League game that's going on either on the same day or the next day. It's like, is it reasonable to kind of expect a family or a group of people to go to 2 games back to back or day after day? I'm not sure it is. So there's a few little things that it's quite hard for it to position itself that I'd put it down to. I would argue that the quality is there. I would argue that if you come into Japan and you want to see like the next wonder kid, then get out to a Wii League game and for sure you'll see it. We do have, which we should mention, the first Asian Women's Champions League that's going to be happening in the next couple of months, right? It's so that's going to be a very big event. I think there'll be a little bit of hype around that. So hopefully that'll be kind of like a springboard thing to get a little bit more interest, international club football in the region, and hopefully that'll kind of pave the way moving forward. But yeah, I think what the JFA's thinking seems to be, yes, let's kind of promote the regional soccer as much as we can, but winning a major tournament for Japan, that will generate interest in women's football in general in Japan, in general basically. So that will probably be what they're trying to aim for as kind of a priority, I suppose.
Yeah, that's all sounding very, very familiar. Double headers, games colliding with the others. Like that's definitely all sounding very, very familiar to here in Australia. But we'll get on to the squad selected for the SheBelieves Cup. What was your initial reaction to the squad? I know we sort of touched on it already, but so many of the players being based in Europe. But I guess the squad as a whole, the makeup, and what the expectations are for Japan at this tournament. Here in Australia, Tom Samani said, we're going over there to win, and all these sorts of things. Is it the same expectation in Japan, or is it very much a, first team, first camp, let's try to see what we're working with here against world-class opposition?
It's going to be a little from column A, a little from column B, I think. The squad composition is strong. I would say, in terms of everyone who's fit, it's probably the strongest that you could possibly put together for a Japan squad. What Nielsen has mentioned is that he's prioritised, of course, things like, the mentality that I've seen and the qualities on the pitch, who's in form, but he's been very careful in picking players, or predominantly picking players who are in season and have that kind of match fitness. And as such, we don't have too many NWSL players there, only 2 players who have been selected. And the reason for that is not because he doesn't have much of a preference for that league, or he doesn't think that league has the standard. It's because they haven't been playing, or they're in pre-season right now, right? So it has to be people who are kind of bang in form with their team. That's why there's so many from England, including a couple that have fallen out of favour, or haven't been selected under the outgoing manager. A few people have come back in. Only 4 from the Wii League, who are also kind of in the winter break at the moment, so that might be in the same kind of consideration. So that's one thing. So that kind of says to me that, yeah, he's going to go out there and put together a strong team that is capable of kind of performing on the pitch and really going out to win. That seems to be the intention. But I think that he's also said that he's going to try a few new things, maybe not so much tactical, but try and get the mentality. He's trying to play a little bit more kind of front-footed, get them higher up the pitch, not just passing for passing's sake, but passing with real intent. So whether there's a bit of a bedding in period, there's maybe a little bit of a disjointedness, maybe he's going to try a new formation or something like that. That might play into things. So that's why we made, in terms of expectations, although they're going out to win, there may be a little bit of frailty or a little bit of kind of, I don't know, like, disorganization or something like that, that they're still working on. Especially for that first game against Australia, that might be one thing to look at.
And then I guess you covering the tournament and all that sort of stuff, what are you expecting to see from Japan over the next 3 days, or over the next 3 games?
Right. Okay. So so it is quite unclear because we don't have a lot of details about the exact tactical approach. But if I was gonna kind of guess how these three games are going to be managed, I'd say against Australia, it's going to go for the strongest team. I think that what Nielsen understands his best team to be. Then 2 days later, it's Colombia. You're going to get some rotation there, and I think we're going to see something completely different. That'll be the plan B. And then Japan play the US last game, so it's going to be kind of like a grand finale. Japan going out to the US in the Olympics, right, in the quarterfinal after extra time. So I think he's going to rotate back into the strongest team and see what they can do there. In terms of how many points they can get on the board, it's a very tough one against Australia. And we have to remember that Japan have not played, even before Nielsen came in. They have not played since October. I think the Matildas, they've played like 4 times, right? A couple of games in November and then in December as well. So there is going to be a little bit more cohesion, maybe a little bit more kind of chemistry there. That's had a little bit more time to kind of work itself out. So I think, Japan might be a bit disjointed in that first game. So I'm not sure how that might go. If it's player for player, I'd probably put it with Japan, but you never know for the things that I've just mentioned. So I wouldn't be surprised if Japan don't take the 3 points there. Maybe even Australia get the win there. We don't know. Colombia, again, they're a team that have some very good players, but how they manage the tournament, remains to be seen. Are they going to play Maida Ramirez in all of the games, Linda Carcedo in all of the games? We don't know. So I'd probably guess Japan, they'd probably get around 4 points would be my prediction. How those 4 points come about, I don't know. And where 4 points gets you, I'm not too sure either. But I don't think we'd be looking at a top finish and probably not a 4th place finish either for Japan.
Yeah,
That's a
I'm
little bit
expecting.
vague, I know, but
No, that's fair. I'm honestly expecting quite similarly from the Matildas. I think it's going to be there will be a win in there. It's just who that win comes against and what that win looks like. Is it a scrappy win? Is it a dominant victory? It's kind of unclear from my perspective, at least. The last topic I really wanted to touch on was the arrival of Leah Blaney. So this dropped a couple of months ago here in Australia. It was a press release sent out on, I think it was a Sunday afternoon, so very out of the blue, completely unexpected that she's taken up a role as the assistant coach. The person who's heading up the search for the next head coach here, Heather Garriott, was talking about it as sort of like, it's important for her to spread her wings and to be based in the environment with one of the top teams in Asia, getting extra experience. And we touched on it a little bit earlier, with this idea that Leah Blaney's always seen Japan as sort of like the benchmark where Australia needs to be. What are they doing? How do we get to that? And that's very much been seen through her approach with the young Matildas squad, at the underage tournaments, but, quite often going down to Japan, but also being quite competitive at the same time. And so what was the reaction not only to her arrival, but how she's taking this challenge? Because I understand you spoke to her a few days ago.
Yeah. Well, the reaction. I think it's similar to with Nils Nielsen. I don't think she's done a whole lot of media work with the Japanese press at the moment. But I think most people would just kind of embrace it as a fresh idea for Nadeshiko Japan to have another foreign coach in there. When I first spoke with Nils Nielsen, I did kind of touch a little bit upon what he believed Leah's best kind of skills are, and he mentioned that she'd be very good working one-on-one with the players, and that will be predominantly what he kind of aims for her to focus on. So I think since she came over to Japan in early January with Nielsen and watched some of the games. Since then, she's been back over in Europe watching some of the WSL games, which for the teams that do have Japanese players on the books, and then attending their trainings and working closely with the players, meeting them and that kind of thing. So I think she's going to have a very, very hands-on role with Japan, and she's going to kind of look at what they're doing, maybe add a little bit of what, because you mentioned a lot about Australia looking at Japan, but I also think that Japan do look to the likes of Australia and teams overseas as well to look at some of the elements that Japan has been missing. And usually these are kind of like mental traits, kind of decisiveness, clinicalism in front of goal, this kind of stuff. So she's probably going to be working with players on that kind of thing, to put it broadly. So I think, yeah, that's a very, very kind of welcome appointment, I think. Interestingly, she is going to be working alongside Michihisa Kano, who was the head coach for Japan under-20s at the last Asian Cup in Uzbekistan last year. And maybe you remember, or maybe you don't want to remember, the semi-final match between Japan and Australia, which Japan won 5-1. They were both in opposing dugouts for that game. So now they're coming together both as assistant coaches underneath Niels Nilsson, just to kind of give a little bit more intrigue to the whole arrangement. But yeah, no, it looks like it's going to be. She seems very kind of like raring to go, getting her hands very dirty, working with the players. Looking forward to both the She Believes and also coming back to Japan in April for the game in Osaka against Colombia. So I think she's going to kind of grab this opportunity with both hands, and yeah, and we'll see how it goes from here.
Yeah, I do remember that game. It was a wake up call. I will say that. But I mean, that's sort of where the Matildas have been in tournament play against Japan, particularly at the underage level. It's quite often it's very clear Japan's here and the Matildas are down here with just sort of the way things have worked out. So I do appreciate that insight because I think that I think for Japan, I think they are getting a very good coach in Leah Blaney. And I will say I had her as, I don't want to say a front runner for the senior Matildas job, but I certainly thought that she should be in consideration, and wouldn't have surprised me if she took over on an interim basis. But that obviously didn't happen. But yeah, very, very good coach. Every interaction I've had with Blaney, she's been wonderful. So I think you're getting someone good there. Then just sort of like the next 12 months as we head towards the Asian Cup, it's going to be a key tournament. What are the expectations for Japan over the next 12 months?
Well, I think for what they're going to do, I mean, it's quite tough because I don't think we have a whole lot of until the Asian Cup. I mean, it's just we have this She Believes, and that's probably going to be the best, the most high profile competition that we have until then. So there's also this East Asian Cup that Japan playing, but I don't think that's a FIFA competition. It's more of a kind of a B team type competition. So they're going to have to set something else up. I'd say probably around October. I dream of a similar tournament to She Believes being held here in Japan. That would be a great idea, but whether that comes to fruition, who knows. But yeah, it's basically just going to be preparation for the Asian Cup as the first major tournament, because women's football for us in AFC, it's like Asian Cup, World Cup, Olympics. And I think the expectation is for Japan to get something there, win or at least get very, very, very close, a podium finish, at least one of those competitions, if not going all the way and getting a major, lifting the trophy. So for this year, I think, it's going to be a lot of Nielsen kind of figuring out how he wants his team to play, betting in his best formation, understanding the players individually, understanding the Japanese game. And then for the Asian Cup, I think, if a team with the quality of Japan, you can't look at it and think that nothing else but to go on and win the thing. Obviously, Australia as well would probably be the closest competitor, and I know North Korea are coming back a little bit these days, but I think that winning the Asian Cup will be the intention, and then from here, 2025 will just be putting everything in place and working towards that objective.
Yeah, I think that's how I've been looking at the SheBelieves Cup, is because Australia are obviously hosting the Asian Cup, qualify automatically. It's very much, this is the closest we're going to get to competitive football for the next 12 months, so have to make something of it. And hopefully that's more than 4 or 5 points at the SheBelieves Cup. A couple of wins would be nice, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, Alex?
No, I think that we've pretty much wrapped everything up in terms of She Believes. But just going back to Tony Gustafsson a bit and the arrangement of him being based overseas, you kind of went through the timeline of it. But overall, what was the total in terms of the fans of the Matildas? Was that? It seems to be mainly been a negative experience, right? Because this is something that fans of Nadeshko are going to have to kind of get used to, I suppose, in the next coming months. It's going well so far, but it might not always pan out like that. So what was the overall kind of impression of that whole experience with Gustafsson there?
So from the fan perspective, I think a lot of fans weren't necessarily aware that he was based in Europe. I think it was more coming from the media, who were more than aware that he was based in Europe, and sort of, if like your general punter wasn't necessarily who's not listening to podcasts, they're not doing articles. It's just sort of like, okay, they know when the games are on, they'll watch, but then they'll forget about it until the next game. Whereas from those who, taking in podcasts like this, reading all the articles, they were obviously aware, and the reaction was not the best. But I mean, at the same time, Gustafsson also very much embraced his role. Like, he was always passionate about the job. He was always, talking about it glowingly. Like, he very much took Australia into his heart and was sort of, doing things from that perspective. He did basically everything but move here, in terms of taking Australia on. I just, I think his tenure, particularly towards the back end, might have gone a little bit differently if he was based here. But I think it also became clear as the World Cup rolled around, when it was sort of out of the 23 player squad, it was basically, here's the 15 players I want to use, and that's it. Like, it was sort of on a collision course to nowhere after that, because he always talked about the idea of having the starting 11 and the finishing 11, but then, as he got further into his tenure, that sort of went away, and it very much became a, here's my core, here's my plan A, and my plan B is to do plan A better. So how much of that related to the fact that he wasn't based in Australia is unclear, but yeah, I think had he been based here, that things might have ended differently. Hopefully that's not going to be the case for Japan under Nielsen. I think one advantage that you have there is the travel time's a bit shorter, so it's probably a little bit easier for him to fly back and forth, whereas it's very hard to find a direct flight from Europe to Australia. You're looking at multiple connections, so you lose almost 2 days every time you come here from Europe, so it makes it very hard.
Right, yeah, well, hopefully Denmark is a little bit of a clearer shot than, so, well, fingers crossed then that, it's a bit of a different story for us.
Yeah, hopefully it is indeed. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find your stuff?
Okay, yeah, well, Blue Sky, abishop32. Twitter still doing that for now, and abishop32 as well on there. 32 being the number I used to have on the back of the shirt when I was my career as a centre back, which ended quite prematurely at the age of about 18. But so I'm doing both of them, and all my stuff goes out on there.
No worries. As I said, thank you so much for joining us today. Greatly appreciated.
Been a pleasure.
And we thank Alex so much for joining us on this episode of the Dubcast. Burke, one of the things that stood out to me from that interview was the discussion around Australia looking to Japan, or Leah Blaney specifically, always looking to Japan. And we discussed this with Kieran Yap when we had him on the show a few weeks back. Whereas, there's a lot of people who are just like, well, it's the US, it's Europe, that's where we need to be looking. And the idea that for Japan, a nation that a lot of us look to, they're also looking at us. I don't know, it just felt like just a strange sort of connection where it's like, we're not necessarily as far removed as a lot of people tend to think that we are in Australian football from arguably the benchmark nation inside the AFC.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's definitely changed in the last 3 or 4 years. I think if you go back 3 or 4 years ago, no one's putting us anywhere near Japan. Every game we played against Japan, I would get the fear. And I still get the fear, but not as much. Because we've covered a lot of ground. Japan have always been a huge footballing nation, especially in the women's game. I mean, they were finalists in the World Cup in 2015. I won't go into that game because I don't want to. I don't want to talk about that. But they've always been a huge footballing nation. So to hear that they look at us is actually quite cool. Because I feel, like we've always considered them to be such a huge threat. So to hear that they kind of see us as a big threat too is pretty cool. But yeah, the idea of oh, we need to look at the US, we need to look at Europe, blah blah blah. I don't care. I don't care about them. They're on the other side of the world. Japan are right here. They're literally our like upstairs neighbors. I think they're a bit more important to focus on, especially right now, considering the Asian Cup is around the corner. Couldn't care less what Europe are doing right now, unless it's England crashing out of the Euros so we get Serena Wiegmann. That's all I care about. About Europe. America, I don't even want to think about her. And I'm not going to, because I don't have to. I'm in charge of my brain. I'm not thinking about that threat. No, thank you. Um, but I think Japan are a really exciting team. They've always been exciting, but I guess I haven't spent too much time focusing on them other than being very scared of them. So I do want to see success for them, but not as much success as we get. So I'm very happy that Leah Blaney has gone over there to learn all of their secrets and then bring them back to us. Because she will come back. We will
Of
not lose
course.
her. She will return. And she will have a very large dossier on Japan and their footballing tactics. And then we will undo them from the inside out. Trust the
Yeah,
process. It'll only take like 5 years. But I have faith.
yep, 5 years, and Leah Blaney is going to be in charge of the senior women's national team and running the female football curriculum in this country. You heard it here first. That's not a conspiracy theory at all.
No.
In 2030, that's exactly what's going to happen. In 2030 does not
Yeah.
sound like a real year.
No. And that's why we know this is actually a feasible thing to say, because like as unreal as it is, 2030 is also unreal. So they can be unreal together.
Yes. The other thing that I sort of really wanted to touch on, in a little bit more detail from that interview, Burke, was the other thing that sort of really cripples football in this country is the NRL and the AFL. And it was interesting to hear Alex talk about, you know, for everything we see here in Australia, Japan is a massive footballing nation and whatnot. They're competing against baseball, which is arguably the national sport. Basketball's on the rise, and all these sort of other sports where it's like you're competing for time, you're competing for eyeballs. The idea behind double headers as well, which are very prominent here in Australia. We've made our thoughts clear on those, but the idea that getting families to multiple games within a weekend across both the J League and the Wee League. I don't know. I listened to that and it was just sort of like, maybe Japan actually isn't so different from Australia.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, wow, it's so nice to hear that someone else is suffering exactly the same way that we are. I love not being alone. We are friends in our suffering. Oh, yeah, the competing with different sporting codes is something that I feel doesn't really happen anywhere else because I feel there's quite a bit of disconnect between different sports in, say, like the US or even in Europe, um, between like the different codes, like the NF is it NFL? I'm sorry, that's not a real sport to me, so it doesn't like I don't care about it. Like NFL fans and like football, soccer fans, I feel there's not too much of an overlap there. Also because there are so many people in the US, but in Australia, there's what, 26 million of us? It's like the population of Texas, not even. Um, and with so many sporting codes that are at such a high level, it is very difficult to get everyone's interest, especially if they overlap or you have competition, like different cups and tournaments and whatever happening at the same time or different times or whatever. So it's nice to hear that there's someone else out there that gets it. Japan, I see you and your struggles, and I hope you see mine too. Solidarity to you.
Solidarity indeed. And that will bring us nicely to our preview for the SheBelieves Cup. So, sort of touch on this with Alex a little bit, Burke. I can see the Matildas getting 4 points from a possible 9 here. But I don't know where these points are going to come from. Like, you could give me any sort of permutations of results here, and I'd be like, yeah, I believe that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, Japan are a strong side, the USA are a strong side, who seemingly went through their 6 months of turmoil, um, prior to the Olympics. And then Emma Hayes arrives, and all of a sudden everything's fixed, and they're back to dominating football again.
That
Um,
just wasn't
Colom-
fair. I'm sorry, but you should have to suffer like through growing pains with a new coach. You shouldn't just come back and be winning. Sorry to sidetrack, but it just wasn't fair. I hate it.
No, I hate it as well. That's not fair. The Americans should be made to suffer through a rebuild. Um, and then you've got Colombia, who, Maya Ramirez, Linda Caicedo, just, a nation on the rise. I mean, this is, in terms of, a, like, these are all very, very good sides. And so it's sort of like, I guess, from your perspective, how do the Matildas find a way to beat each of these opponents throughout this group?
Honestly, I don't know. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Thank God I am not the coach, because that job would suck. Um, it's not to say that we can't do it. We can beat all of these sides. Have we played Colombia before and beaten them? Maybe.
That is a very good
Um,
question and feels like something I should know.
Regardless, we can beat anyone on our day. I think we just have to have 3 days that are our days, um, and hope that they're also not having their days. I don't. I would be very happy with drawing all of these teams. And I know it's not in the spirit of the cup, but it's also a fake tournament, Mickey Mouse Cup, that I don't care about. Um, so if we can, honestly, if the Matildas can go out there and get some good football played and get some good minutes in and work on like building the connections that they need to make on the pitch, and no one gets grievously injured, fingers crossed, knock on wood, inshallah, said the obole, etc., etc. I will be happy with that. I do not care about the SheBelieves trophy. They can have that. I mean, they're going to the trouble of making it. The US can have it. I don't care. Let us have a good tournament and preferably not get like absolutely smacked by anyone. That would also be good because I never enjoy the media cycle after a smacking. No, not the media cycle, the weird little minions on the internet. I never enjoy them after a smacking
Probably all
or in
the
general,
same
but
Probably all the same people I've seen angrily reacting across social media to today's press conference at the time of recording from Ellie Carpenter. It takes us to our next listener question from Almost Clutch, also on Blue Sky. Not exactly dub related, but I'm curious what your expectations and hopes are for She Believes. So I know you sort of answered that question a little bit already, Burke, but expectations, hopes, just in terms of the sort of
in
football you want to see played.
in my wildest hopes and dreams, we win every game and smash the US like 5-0. But I just don't think we're gonna do that. We can have, in my wildest hopes and dreams, we can have a conservative like 1-0, 2-1 win over either Japan or Colombia, take your picks, but we smash the US 5-0. In my wildest dreams, my wildest hopes and dreams. Um, what I'm what I'm hoping actually happens is what I said before. I just want us to play some good, consistent football with like clear passing, with a clear sort of roadmap as to how we get the ball from, a goal kick, say, to the final third without like in a good looking way that's not easily disrupted by an opposition. These are not easy things to do against most football teams, let alone the ones we're about to come up against. So we'll see how that goes. Um, but yeah, I also just hope we get to watch some good football because I feel like I haven't seen international football since last year. I don't like that. Get that international football on my screen now, please. So yeah, I would also just like to see some decent football in general, whether it's from us or someone else.
Yeah, for me, I think my expectations for this very much are good quality football. But I'm going to echo the thoughts of Anna Harrington here from the Far Post podcast. I want to see a good Matildas squad, but I don't want to see the same Matildas squad that we've always seen, throughout, where it's like, okay, you can pick the starting 11 with a blindfold on and they play the same way that we always do. And it's Mary Fowler and floating between a 10 and a false 9 who's not really allowed the keys to the vehicle. Kyra Cooney Cross and Gorry in the midfield. Just sort of like, like every, you can sort of tell exactly how the team's going to play, where they're going to go, why they're doing it. I want to, there's a chance here to, particularly with the short turnaround between games, a chance to really rotate the lineup here and see some combinations perhaps that we haven't seen before, or at least seen in a long time, and sort of give the new coach, whenever this magical new coach may or may not appear, to take the Matildas job away from Tom Samani, a better idea of the sort of players that he has against quality international opposition and how to use them moving around a rotated lineup, because we all remember the Tony Gustafson era, and that was 15 players, and plan B was to do plan A better, and we don't want that again. And then the other,
Don't do it like that. Plan B was maybe it wasn't Plan B, maybe it was Plan C. No, it was Plan B. Was Alana Kennedy to the front line. Don't 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 do her dirty like that in her striker era for all of like 4 minutes when it got really sad and desperate.
yes, that Nigeria game sticks out like a sore thumb. But I mean, she was supposed to be there anyway. It's a corner. The tall lad always goes up to the corner. And then I guess the other thing that I want to see from this is, regardless of the result, I want to see a good game against Japan on Friday morning. I think, as I touched on in the interview with Alex, it's very much this is where we need to be looking at ahead of the Asian Cup. We've had good results against the likes of the United States before, ahead of Asian Cups and other major tournaments, and then absolutely collapsed at said tournaments because, well, what do you know? We haven't faced Asian opposition. Like, I mean, that 2021 friendly series, that those two matches, also in Sydney and Newcastle, like the two South Korea games coming up that were against the USA. Or was that 2020 that those happened, the back end of 2020?
It might have been 2020.
Maybe I've got my timeline wrong. But anyway, I distinctly remember those two games. An okay first performance, a good second performance against the USA, and then at the following Asian Cup, getting absolutely destroyed by South Korea in the quarterfinals and getting knocked out. I mean, 2017 sticks out as well. Good result against the USA. Didn't do anything at the Asian Cup. Like, we've seen this story before, and so I would very much like to see a good performance here against Japan, regardless of the result. That's why I want to see good performances against South Korea in the April window, regardless of the results. I want to see how well we do against top quality Asian opposition, because what we have to remember here is, coming into the Asian Cup, this is the final time that World Cup qualification is still on the line at this tournament.
Yeah.
And even though with the expansion to 32 teams, I believe the AFC gets 8 spots. I think off the top of my head it is 6 direct to this qualifying playoff tournament, whatever that is. And so you're looking at a situation where, like, yes, Australia should qualify, but, you'd rather just do it as easily as possible and try to win some silverware on home soil, rather than have to go through intercontinental playoff tournament games, whatever that looks like, instead of getting quality friendlies in ahead of the World Cup, which is what you'd much rather be doing in that window, rather than being like, oh crap, we have to play good for 180 minutes in order to make the World Cup. That's not good. We don't want to be doing that. So that's sort of what I want to see here out of the She Believes Cup. In other international news, Football Australia has announced that Alexia Apostolakis, Tiana Fuller, Isabella Hoyos, and Amber Luchtmeyer have all been medically withdrawn from the Young Matildas squad for their 3-game series round robin coming up against, or the Pacific Oz Four Nations tournament coming up against Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, and Thailand's under-20 side. Those 4 will be replaced by Indy Brea, Alexis Collins, Nikita Fazari, and Christina Kachik for the upcoming window. Just an unfortunate run of injuries from the last round of fixtures, Burke. Like I said, I was at Perry Park and watched Isabella Hoyos sort of come from the field, and it didn't look good.
No, from what I read, it was an ankle injury to her, concussion to Luchtmeyer, and then 2 thigh injuries, both for Apostolakis and Fuller. Is Alexia Apostolakis actually injured, or do they just want to keep her nice and fresh for City's next game? Who knows? Not me. Another conspiracy theory for you. Yeah, this sucks. This sucks. Especially for Hoyas, because if it's an ankle injury, it may actually, well, it most likely will be serious. Apostolakis has already been cleared to return to City's next game. Concussions are nasty, and I hope Luxmeyer is having a lovely time in some very dark rooms. And yeah, I hope Fuller's well on her way back as well. Excited to see Bria. I've enjoyed what I have seen of her so far in the A-League Women's. Yeah, injuries always suck, but yeah, it's a good opportunity for the rest of them to get a chance as well.
Yeah, it will be indeed. And speaking to Alex Smith after that Brisbane Royal game, hopeful with this international break that he'll be able to get some of his injured players back, get some fitness for their run home in the finals, because their injury list is about as long as my arm at the moment. It's not pretty. We also have a new international kit, Burke. This was announced by Football Australia on Monday. It's a kit designed by First Nations artist, and about, I want to say, no more than half an hour after the press release, it got leaked.
What?
Well, maybe
That's so
I got
crazy.
my timings wrong there, but it was certainly within a couple of hours of the announcement that it got leaked. And I mean, assuming that this is the kit, it's sort of a tricolour zigzaggy pattern of Australian gold, light green and dark green mix. I think, as Madge said on the Beyond 90 podcast, who I as she also said, I caught up with on the weekend at Perry Park. It was very nice visit. I have a wonderful new pride scarf in my collection from the Royal Corps, so it
Lovely.
was very good visit up to Perry Park for me. Just seeing how this kit looks on the field on players, I think, is going to be key, because I don't know. I wasn't sold on it at first, Burke, when I saw this, and I'd be fascinated to hear what you thought of it.
Yeah, I'm also currently unsold. But I'm also not one to trust on kit opinions, because I loathed the Spew kit when it first came out. Like, I hated it. Now I have a signed Steph Catley one in my wardrobe. So, everything could change in a minute. It could be well hated, and then we go and win the Mickey Mouse Cup in it. So it becomes a classic because it means we beat the US in it. Like, who knows? We're probably not going to be wearing it at the Asian Cup, because we'll most likely have another new kit by then, even though that's a year away ish. So I'm not too phased by it. So if I don't like it on the pitch, I don't have to worry about there being Asian Cup photos with it. which isn't to say that the following kid will be better, but, I'm definitely waiting to see what it looks like on the pitch, not just being like modeled by the players in like an announcement on the pitch. I don't know how well the bright green is going to go. The dark green is fine. I'm interested to what color shorts we're going to do with it and what color's the numbering going to be. I have many more questions. Pandora's box is open. I have so many questions and I have to wait so long for them all to be answered. But yeah, I'm not sold yet. Some of the kits I have seen and been like, yeah, this is really good from the outset. And others I've hated, as I said, and changed my mind on. But I'm not picking a side. I'm fence sitting until I have enough information. I'm not making a rash judgment. Is
Yep.
my position. My
Yeah,
position
no,
is that I have none.
Yeah, it immediately what comes to mind there is the scene from Futurama with the neutral peoples. Is I have no strong feelings one way or the other. No,
Exactly.
I completely agree with that. In terms of the shorts, green shorts can't lose is all I'll say
Of
there as to what color
course.
I hope the shorts are. Um, you know what? There is another kit to talk about, but I think we're going to leave that till next week when the kit is actually formally announced. Because I think talking about it now is just going to create more problems than it should. So there's a nice little teaser for next week. In terms of our listener questions, Sananjai, Tipo, and Blue Sky, do we have a definitive result for the Brisbane versus Western United game yet? Yes, we did. I should have brought that up earlier. And then Chris on Blue Sky, what is the issue with selecting a Matildas coach? We've answered that already.
You tell me,
Why
man.
should Perry Park be built yesterday? Yes, it should be built yesterday. We know exactly why it should be built yesterday. It definitely needs a new lick of paint, at the very least, from my brief visit to Perry Park. I mean, I looked around; it was a perfectly fine venue. I said this on Blue Sky that I was getting flashbacks to Valley Road in Devonport. Which, given that both of those, both Perry Park and Valley Road are home to a team named the Strikers, really shouldn't have surprised me as much as it did. But I mean, look, Perry Park, it's great location. As I said, the facilities need a little bit of work, but other than that, like I could see that being a very good home for football in Brisbane. So whoever needs to get on that, can you get on that like 2 years ago, please? And then, as part of the Ramble Australia podcast network, I did tease this a little bit last week, but we do have another new show debuting this week, Building the Pyramid, which is going to look at all of the non-A Leagues football in Australia. I believe the debut episode of that is coming this week. So stay tuned to Ramble Australia socials if you want to find out more about that one. Another lengthy one this week, Burke. But once again, there was a lot to talk about.
I mean, yeah, what can we do? Just not talk about it? That's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about it. You'll get what you're given, and you'll listen. Maybe. I don't know. I don't have access to the backdoor numbers, so maybe you do listen, maybe you don't. It's none of my business. I just show up here.
Yes. No. Look, we appreciate every single one of our listeners. We appreciate getting all of your questions in as well.
Yeah.
And if you want a little bit of bonus Dubcast content, following each of the Matildas games in this window, we'll be having instant reaction videos on YouTube. So we'll be recording them as soon as the game's done, and we'll be getting those up as quickly as we can. So those will be YouTube exclusive videos. They won't appear in the normal podcast feed. So if you want our instant reactions, head to the Dubcast YouTube channel. But of course, we'll be back next Wednesday where we will go over the games against Japan and the USA and look ahead to the game against Colombia in more detail, as well as the Young Matildas Pacific Australia Four Nations series. But that will do it for this episode of the Dubcast, part of the Round Ball Australia podcast network. Burke, thank you once again for chatting football.
Yeah. Anytime and every time it seems.
And my name is Poletti. We'll be back next week on Wednesday. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.